mail the link. Okay, we are currently on the last subsection of motion and the centers, called the centers and initiation. This is literally the last subsection of this division. We'll be starting the whole second part of the book once we finish this in about 20 page. Okay, so last month we continued with the mini tutorial on the permanent atoms and the spiralae, noting that spiralae are streams of second aspect vitality that circulates geometrically within the walls of the permanent atoms, which is composed of third aspect force or substance. Just meaning that even at a material level, the permanent atoms are being, you could say, energized by the soul aspect or the second aspect substance. You could say more correctly, it'd be causal body level substance. Next, we learned that spiralae are the response mechanism of a permanent atom, thereby allowing the light of the permanent atom to increase, which has a reciprocal effect on the unfolding of the chakras. As the permanent atom becomes more radiant, it awakens into activity the higher spiralae, with the fifth being especially expressive of a heightened soul personality interactivity. The whole purpose of this mini tutorial was to further understand the statement that we came to in the main text, which reads, certain of the central spokes of the wheel have a close connection with the different spiralae in the permanent atoms. Through their stimulation, there comes into play one or more of the corresponding spiralae in the permanent atoms on the three lower planes. So we learned a lot just in this passage, not the least of which was that there are certain central spokes within a chakra that are different than the other spokes of the wheel or other petals of the lotus, depending on how you look at it. And it's that these spokes that have this interrelationship, this mutual relationship with the spiralae, where that which is gained through the permanent atom affects the chakras and vice versa. This interrelated activity continues, we're told, after the third initiation, leading to a, quote, corresponding stimulation in the permanent atoms of the triad, which is responsible for, and this is important, the transference of the lower polarization into the higher. So it's the interrelated activity of certain higher spiralae with certain chakras that allows one to break free of the need to incarnate and repolarize on the Buddhic plane. And we have to assume that this is that these chakras involved also awaken the vortices within the Buddhic vehicle. Okay, so I would invite you all to participate, right? Ask questions about anything you don't understand. I promise you, you won't be the only person that isn't understanding it, right? So feel free to ask questions if anything's unclear. And also, if you have any comments, the only thing I ask is that you keep your comments relevant to the material we're discussing. But that's the only thing. Otherwise, really, please join in. Okay, next we learned that as a result of the application of the rod of initiation, the downflow of force from the ego, from the soul, to the personality is tripled. Either this tripling takes place at every initiation, meaning that the tripling that takes place at the second initiation creates 9 times the inflow compared to the 3 times increase at the first initiation, which, by the way, would result in 27 times as great a downflow during the third initiation. So that's one possibility. Or there is a tripling of soul force in the physical etheric centers at the first initiation, a tripling of force into the astral centers at the second initiation, and finally a tripling of the force into the mental centers at the third initiation, which he alludes to here. Yeah, I'm tending towards this second explanation, that it's a sequential tripling, starting with the physical etheric, then to the astral, then to the mental, rather than that it's an algorithmic 3, then 9, then 27. It seems to make more sense to me. We then learned that, quote, when the world teacher initiates at the first and second initiations, the direction of triadal force is turned to the vivification of the heart and throat centers, and the ability to synthesize the force of the lower centers is greatly increased. So raised initiations suggest that the throat center is vivified at the first initiation, because he's kind of ambiguous here. You're not sure which is connected with which. And that the heart center is vivified at the second initiation, though I think there's probably some vivification of both these centers at both initiations. And then the last part of this, I'm only really looking at now, and the ability to synthesize the force of the lower centers is greatly increased. So the centers below the diaphragm are synthesized within the solar plexus. So this suggests that that energy is also greatly increased during these first 2 initiations. Yes, Nadell.
When you say that the ability is synthesized, would that mean that the ability to transfer energy, say from the sacral center to the throat center, would be increased?
Yes. The strictly speaking, synthesizing the energies is a function of the solar plexus with in terms of the lower centers. That is, it becomes the clearinghouse for all the energies of the centers below it. And then when that happens, and that's also very connected with personality integration, after that happens, there's a transfer to the heart center. There's another transfer from the sacral center to the throat. That's not, strictly speaking, a synthesis. It's literally a awakening of a higher octave of the energy that animated those lower centers and is expressive through the 2 higher centers. But this all happens at the same time or within a similar time period as this synthesizing energy of the lower centers. In other words, that's a very, very much a needed process that goes on at the same time. There's also a higher synthesis, a kind of final synthesis, which leads to the shattering of the causal body. That's when all the centers are synthesized by the highest head centers. And there are, along the way, triangles of Kundalini force circulating between the chakras. That has a synthesizing effect. The 3 become 1. Um, and I'm, even though DK doesn't specifically say this, I'm sure that that's indeed what's going on. That there's this triangular momentum during the synthesis that takes place, both in the solar plexus and later in the higher centers. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. So DK then lists 4 effects on the initiate's physical plane life from what he calls a fresh access of vibratory capacity. This is that threefold increase in energy that comes from the soul. These effects include, first, a sensitiveness and refinement of the vehicles. That's going to have to do with taking in higher grade of substance into the form aspect, including higher percentage of atomic substance. Second, development of psychic faculties. Psychic faculties are the senses as they demonstrate on the astral and mental planes. Third, a burning away through a gradual arousing of Kundalini of the etheric web. This is a very definite process that happens in very specific stages. And 4, a gradual grasp of the law of vibration as an aspect of the basic law of building. And I would think this, which allows, to further read here, allows one to manipulate thought matter, perfecting of the plans of the logos. So you become at that stage or at least you move into training to be an effective white magician through this. This is going to require some degree of intuition in order to gain this grasp of the law of vibration. It's not an intellectual gaining that we're talking about. This has to do with an inner sensitivity that where one receives the knowledge and awareness of how this law works, right? And then be able to manipulate this law in such a way that one can build thought forms. Okay, and that pretty much takes us up to where we left off last time. Yes, Barbara?
Yes, I'm wondering if the permanent atoms are transformed in this process also, and if it affects the spirale of the permanent atoms.
These 4 stages, you mean?
Yes, are they recorded in the
Yeah.
permanent
Oh,
atoms?
absolutely.
Because that's the only thing that's sort of pulled out at death. So
Right. Yeah, none of these effects die with you at your physical death. All of this survives one's death. And it's all, as you suggest, and it's a good point because it links these 2 systems. All of it's recorded in the permanent atoms, but also, we've learned in this mini tutorial that there's a very much a heightening of interactivity between the centers of the Kundalini and the spirale of the permanent atoms, and that there is an interchange of energy that is part of the process. So it's not just like, a passive, a library of information as to your state of becoming, which is kind of how we tend to think of a permanent atom. It just holds what you have developed up to that time. Well, this is clearly not the case, and the reason is that the spirale interact with the chakras. So thanks for that question. Okay. So we'll pick up this is the point where we left off last time. It says there's a definite occult reason of the laws of electricity. It's going to be laws that govern Fohat behind the known fact that every initiate presented to the initiator is accompanied by two of the masters who stand one on either side of him. The three of them together, suggesting that it's the initiator and the two masters, form a triangle which makes the work possible. So the best source by far of info on the actual configuration during initiation comes from Initiation Human and Solar, which was written 3 years earlier in 1922. ToCF was written in 25. And it greatly expands on the passage presented here. So I think it's worth taking a moment. It's also a breathtaking passage that describes initiation. So could we get a reader for this?
And Veronica, you want to read?
Hello, yes.
Hello.
It is not possible here to publish the details of the next stage beyond using the description as embodied in the words, fire descends from heaven. Through the utterance of certain words and phrases, which are one of the secrets of initiation, and which vary with each initiation, the electrical force to be employed descends upon the rod, passing through the heart and the hand of the initiator to the three who stand in triangular relation to the throne of office. They receive it in turn and circulated by act of will through their hearts, thus passing it to the sponsors. They, again by an act of will, prepare to transmit it to that center of the body of the initiate which is according to the initiation to receive stimulation. Then succeeds an interesting interlude wherein the united wills of the hierarchy are blended in order to transmit that force which the rod has put into circulation. The Hierophant utters the word, and the force is literally thrown into the initiate's body and centers, passing down through the centers on the mental plane, via the astral centers to the centers of the etheric levels, which finally absorb it. This is the stupendous moment of the initiate and brings to him a realization of the literal absolute truth of the phrase, that God is a consuming fire. He knows past all gainsaying that fiery energy and electric force constitute the sum total of all that is. He is literally bathed in the fires of purification. He sees fires on all sides pouring down through the rod, circulating around the triangle and passing through the bodies of the two sponsoring adepts. For a brief second, the entire lodge of masters and initiates standing in the ceremonial places without the triangle are hidden from view by a wall of pure fire. The initiate sees no one save the Hierophant and is aware of nothing but a fiery blaze of pure blue-white flame, which burns but destroys not, which intensifies the activity of every atom in his body without disintegrating, and which purifies his entire nature. The fire tries his work of what sort it is, and he passes through the flame. Sorry, I didn't understand the last phrase.
The fire tries his work. That is, it tempers
Okay.
his work of what sort it is. That is, I would think his the work he is to do, the work which this initiation is preparing him for, his service work. It is an odd sentence. Fire tries his work, and of what sort it is, and he passes through the flame. Yeah, I think it has to do with this nature of his service work. Thank you, Aunt Veronica.
Beautiful passage. Thank you.
It's stunning, isn't it? I mean, you know, this is why the DK material is just so incredibly special. These types of passages, you know, because they open a vision that's truly expansive, extraordinary, any superlative that you can imagine. Yes, Nisa.
I it came to me to ask while Anne Veronica was reading, and I was wondering, is this possibly on the human level a hint as to kind of what goes on during, conscious healing sessions?
Uh,
As
except,
you work with prana and that kind of thing.
right, except for instead of a rod of initiation, there would be the focused intent of the group of healers, which would have an impression upon the one receiving the healing. But there would be no need for sponsors, masters, etc., because it
Right.
would a much gentler form of interface. Um, but certainly energetically, you're going to be dealing with, he talks here about this wave of purificatory fire, right? Certainly that's one thing that the two would have in common. But I think in terms of degree, this would be a stupendously more forceful experience. It's, change your life forever, not just the life you happen to be in, but your whole series of lifetimes would take a sudden, definite, would make a sudden and definite change towards greater service and greater consciousness, right? Okay, let's see here. What do we got? All right, we got Nadell.
This sounds like the third initiation. You think this is also applying to the first and second?
Well, let's see here now. Doesn't
And I
he?
can see this at the third.
Right. I know what you mean because of the extraordinary trauma of it. I was looking to see if there was the Hierophant utters the word. See, the Hierophant is. I think he's purposely keeping this neutral because if he wanted to definitely tie this to the third initiation, he would say the one initiator. But the Hierophant is the Christ, and then it is the one initiator. Later, it's even higher beings than that. But I agree with you that it has a very third initiatory level of power to it. Couple of points I want. Oh yeah, Maria Christina, you had a question or thought?
I just had the thought when comparing the fire that is being applied, I'm hypothetically saying, would be of a different quality, a different fire, if you will, than that used for healing. Healing is very heart-centered, and the Hierophant brings the unknown fire of will to
Yeah,
bear.
I agree. I think so too. Fire is a very, very general term. There's many different qualities of fire. You could say it's a cocktail. It's not a very great word when you're talking about initiation, but it's an admixture of what is needed by the initiate, right? And what the two have in common is that the the energies used in healing are also an admixture of what is needed, to heal the.
Yeah, and it would be more second rate energy as opposed to, electric fire.
Right.
Solar or
There's.
by friction, but and each of those thank you, yes. So it's quite a cocktail, each one. Sevens.
Mhm. I tend to agree with you, that it's, but again, depending on the soul ray of the one being initiated, um, that may also determine the nature of the fire that is sent through the rod. There's a couple of points I wanted to make here in comparison to the um, to what is said in the text, where he says that there's the one initiator and the two masters, and that it's a safe procedure. I'm paraphrasing because there's this triangular. But in this, we have a different description. Where does it say here? Okay, passing through the heart and hand of the initiator to the three who stand in triangular relation to the throne of office. This suggests that the triangle doesn't include, like he stands at the apex, but it's apart from the triangle of the three. And the fact that they're capitalized, both the three and the W of who suggests to me that they are masters. In this process, they then receive it circulated by an act of will through their hearts, thus passing it to the sponsors. Then over here, there's some through the bodies of the two sponsoring adepts. So that suggests the possibility of a 5-pointed star. Um, if there are indeed two sponsors. Um,
And
and then from there, of course, to the center of the body of the initiate, all according to ray type. This is a fabulously rich passage that we could, spend a lot of time on. Hands, let's see, who did I see? Did you, Barbara, are you trying to speak? Or is that Maria Christina? Go ahead.
I just want to say how that reinforces your thought of the quality of the fire, if you will, responding to the ray with depending on who and that would also depend on the sponsors who would be allied with one of the seven rays, as you
Oh, certainly. They would probably come from the ashrams, They'd probably be representatives from the ashram. I don't know why I think this, but I think they're likely to be high initiates rather than masters who work with either the two or three. Here it says three masters who stand in triangular formation. So, we're not given the exact, um, but if you have, it's just interesting to note that if you have the one initiator, you have the three masters, two sponsors, and the initiate himself, that adds to 7, which makes sense because the seventh, who would be the one being initiated, would be the grounding and grounded point that would receive the energy from the other 6. The 1 through the 3 to the 5 to the 7th. Any other thoughts about this? Fascinating. Yeah, this whole section right in here, initiation, human and solar, is literally a blow-by-blow description of what goes on during initiation itself. And he liberally quotes it in this section of TCF. I think there's 2 or 3 pages of quote directly from IHS. Slightly shifted sometimes, or he'll add a phrase or something, but it's almost taken almost verbatim from Initiation, Human and Solar. Okay, anyway. Let me find out where the heck we are. All right, next up. Can we get a reader, please?
Barbara, you want to read?
Yes. The force of the rod is twofold and its power terrific. Apart and alone, the initiate could not receive the voltage from the rod without serious hurt. But in triangular formation, transmission comes safely. The 2 masters who thus sponsor the initiate represent 2 polarities of the electric all. Part of their work is therefore to stand with all applicants for initiation when they come before the great Lord. When the rods of initiation are held in the hands of the initiator in his position of power, and at the stated seasons, they act as transmitters of electric force from very high levels, so high indeed that the flaming diamond at certain of the final initiations, the 6th and the 7th, transmit force via the logos from outside the system altogether. We need to remember that this major rod is the one used on this planet, but that within the system there are several such rods of power, and they are to be found in 3 grades, if it may so be expressed.
Thank you, Barbara. Okay, first, something I caught this time through, the 2 masters who thus sponsor the initiate, that suggests that the sponsors are also masters. So, but if we go back to this extended quote, we see that there are, it's definitely a triangle of masters. The 3, well, we can assume they're masters, the 3 who stand in triangular relation to the throne of office, and that these are different than the sponsors because they receive it in turn and circulate by act of will through their hearts, thus passing it to the sponsors. Okay, so again, what we just read, right, oops. Yeah, here, where it says the 2 masters who thus sponsor the initiate represent 2 polarities. So I think we're looking at 5. The 3, the stand in triangular formation, and the 2 sponsors. That seems consistent. Okay, anyway. All right, back to my notes here. Okay, so first, the force of the rod is twofold, and its power is terrific. Apart and alone, the initiate could not receive the voltage from the rod without serious hurt. But in triangular formation, transmission comes safely. So the quote, force of the rod being twofold suggests first, electric fire, the fire of pure spirit, representing the positive pole, which comes from an ever higher source as the initiations progress from the 1st to the 9th. And second, a more material force capable of attracting and engaging the initiate. Because, the initiate is not at the stage of whose consciousness is directly receptive of this high source electric fire. So the second more material force is able to attract and engage the initiate so that the first, the positive polarity, can do its work. So yeah, the second more material force is capable of attracting and engaging the initiate, which for the first initiations might be mental fire. I'm thinking for this second force. And at the third to the fifth initiations, pure solar fire. The triangular formation of adepts allows for the regulation and grounding of the dual force coming from the rod. I would probably modify that now and say that the two masters would be in direct, would be directly responsible for regulating and grounding the dual force coming from the rod. At any rate, we learn more about the dual fire from this old commentary. Could we get a reader, please?
Gordon, you want to read?
The fire within the lesser fire findeth its progress much impelled when the circle of the moving and the unmoving of the lesser wheel within the greater wheel that moveth not in time findeth a twofold outlet. It then shineth with the glory of the twofold one and of his sixfold brother. Fohat rusheth through space. He searcheth for his complement. The breath of the unmoving one and the fire of the one who seeth the whole from the beginning rush to meet each other, and the unmoving becomes the sphere of activity.
Thank you, Gordon. Okay, you can see in this, we're not going to do a deep dive, even though it's tempting. It's all a function of Fohat, and that this that the duality allows for movement from that place of the unmoving, which would be the source of electric fire, to this into the circle of the moving. And I think for that reason, it's that second fire is necessary. That's how I'm reading it anyway. Okay, next, the two masters who thus sponsor the initiate represent two polarities of the electric all. Part of their work is therefore to stand with all applicants for initiation when they come before the great Lord. So this statement, taken verbatim from Initiation Human and Solar, suggests that one master is responsible for control of the influence streaming in from the positive pole of the rod, and the other master from the negative pole. Yes, Nisa.
So, am I right in that what I'm seeing is that there's the initiator with two masters and the initiate with two masters. So there's six altogether. So there's a higher triangle and a lower triangle.
It's tempting to think that, but from what it's close. What I gained from this reading, and especially that long quote that we read here, is that there are three who stand in triangular relation to the throne of office. That's the first three. They receive and pass it to the sponsors. And over here, we learned that the sponsors, let's see, circling through the triangle and passing through the bodies of the two sponsoring adepts. And in the text we're reading now in TCF, he calls those adepts masters. Adepts often refers to the fourth initiation, and masters to the fifth. So I'm thinking we have a 3 and a 2 who with the who with the initiate himself makes the lower point of that second triangle. So in a sense, you're right that you have two triangles, but it's configured a little differently, right? You have the three masters referred to here who stand in conjunction with the initiator, and then you have the two sponsors and the initiate who form another triangle. That's how I'm saying it. And then if you count the one initiator, you get 7 altogether. I think that's probably the best key as to the correctness of these numbers, is that it adds to 7, because that's so often the case when you're looking for a completion. Okay, let me see what's going on in the chat here. Okay. Yeah, so here we see definitely 2 masters associated with, as sponsors who sponsor the initiate. And they're very much connected. So anyway, this statement, taken verbatim from IHS, suggests that one master is responsible for control of the positive, the other for the negative pole of the rod itself, right? So let's take a look at this another more detailed description, a little bit different orientation. Could we get a reader, please?
Joe, you want to read?
I think you had called on me.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. These 3 factors, the representing deva, the 2 adepts, the initiator, form for a brief second a triangle of force with the initiate at the center. Through them circulates the terrific power, the fire from heaven, which is brought down from the higher triad through the agency of the electrical rod. This application of extra egoic force is in itself of a threefold nature, as symbolized by the 3 protective agencies and the threefold nature of the rod itself. It emanates in a sensory sense from the planetary logos of a man's ray and proceeds from that one of the planetary centers, which corresponds to either the head, heart, or throat center in a human unit. This energy is applied to the corresponding tier of petals and to the corresponding petal in a tier according to the initiation taken and according to the primary and secondary ray.
Joe. So who invited the Devas along? This is a whole new aspect that's not mentioned, certainly not in the section we're on in TCF. But not surprising, is it? But the 2 adepts holds even, 700 pages later here. Right. So, we don't have a singular definitive description, of all aspects. We have to kind of cobble it together. Yeah. But I thought it was a interesting new detail that these 3 come together for a brief second. a triangle of force with the initiate at the center. These three. Yeah, so the two adepts form a point in this particular triangle. This is right. And then we also have another discrepancy, which is that here the rod is described as threefold, whereas in the text we're currently reading, it's described as twofold. We just have to hold these differences, hold them up, and look for explanation at a later point. Okay, I see questions. So let me scroll up here. Okay, Barbara.
Yes, I'm wondering about the statement at the end. And according to the primary and secondary ray. So if this is just fire, what could vary according to the primary and secondary ray? And are there more subtle aspects of the fire? Does it include information and blueprints and systemic changes?
Well, first of all, the primary and secondary ray are the soul and personality rays. The personality ray literally becomes a sub-ray of the soul ray, but it is the ray of the vehicle in which is receiving this great stimulation. So both of those ray types would be very much involved in the orientating the fire. I should say, determining the nature of the fire that's used, and which answers the second part of your question. Absolutely, yes. The fire, as we were talking about before, it's not just some great blaze. It's very particularized. We tend to be blinded by our physical plane understanding of fire. This is, FOHAD is described as intelligent electricity, and this is of that nature. So it can be refined and made specific in ways that we're not told about at all in terms of the nature of this. These would be secrets of initiation because they actually have to do with how to gain particular potency. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And Maria Christina, you had your hand up.
I just wanted to mention that in the chat box, someone made a really good point that maybe it varies as far as which formations are used. The different triangular formations might have to do with initiation being taken from Magda, I think.
Right, let me look. Okay, so yeah, Magda says we should maybe know about which initiation we're talking about, because from 3 to the 3rd to the 5th, Sanat Kumara is the Hierophant, but with progressively different triangular formations. So I understand from our Duval videos, I'm not familiar with those videos, but it doesn't surprise me at all that there would be dramatically different triangular formations based on both the initiation and the rays involved. Yeah, I'll check out the Duval video, since how often do you find any information on this kind of thing? And then you follow that with how and when does an initiate realize who are his two sponsors? For instance, Rudolf Steiner and Headmaster Rakowski and Master Jesus. I would think it comes to the it comes through the sponsorship of the ashram. So as one approaches the ashram, sponsors would emerge in accordance with the master of that ashram, which is of a particular grade type. In fact, DK indicates that there will eventually, there aren't yet, but there will eventually be 49 ashrams, with each ashram representing a sub-ray of a major ray, right? So this is already somewhat particularized, and that the sponsors would emerge from the body of that ashram to which you will eventually belong, to which you find yourself naturally drawn towards. That's my thought on that. Anyone else? Good questions. Provocative, interesting. Thank you. Okay. All right, so next, when the rods of initiation are held in the hands of the initiator in his position of power and at the stated season, they act as transmitters of electric force from very high levels. So high, indeed, that the flaming diamond at certain of the final initiations, the 6th and 7th, transmits force via the logos from outside the system altogether. What an extraordinary passage. So, yeah, again, verbatim quote from Initiation Human and Solar. The term stated seasons suggests that initiation is performed only during certain planetary cycles. We know, for example, that during the eons long period wherein the first 2.5 root races develop, there is no human initiation, because the whole purpose is involutional, is to create an appropriate form, appropriate vehicle, which is then overshadowed by the soul. The involution turns into evolution, and eventually then you move into the season wherein initiation become appropriate. You have a mass initiation at individualization. And after the Lemurian period, it wasn't until Atlantean root race that the most advanced of the Lemurians, including the great being who was destined to become the Christ, began to be initiated. I think the Christ took his 3rd initiation, which was the highest possible in enduring Atlantis. After that, there was a gradual increase in frequency of initiations until the near future, when DK tells us the human kingdom itself as a whole will once again take initiation. I say once again because individualization was considered to be a great initiation. So let's take a closer look at the rod of initiation itself, called by DK the flaming diamond. So I see a couple of hands. Let me see here. We're looking at Maria Christina.
Sorry.
Yo,
And sorry.
you don't have a question?
Nope. Thank
Oh,
you.
fine. Nisa?
Yeah, full of questions today.
Good. Love it.
My, yeah, my, somehow I got the idea that initiation is kind of like, like at Disneyland, they have the fast pass where you don't have to stand in line, and that initiation is a voluntary kind of thing that the soul signs up for somehow.
Uh-huh. Well, I think all those things are true. It's a fast pass compared to the eons long process of quote unquote natural becoming, where just living literally millions of lives, you gradually figure out what you can bypass. No, you don't bypass it. You take a very accelerated course through aspiration, probationary discipleship, and initiation. You still have to learn all the same stuff. There's no free lunch, so to speak. You still must attain the consciousness required in both ways of doing things, right? But instead of taking, a dozen root races or more, who knows how long, you can do it within a much, much shorter period of time. So that's how I understand it. Okay, can we get a reader, please, for this description of the rod?
Kirsten.
The rod of initiation, known as the flaming diamond, is used by Sanat Kumara, the one initiator. This rod lies hidden in the east and holds the fire hidden that irradiates the wisdom religion. This rod was brought by the Lord of the World from Venus, and once in every world period it is subjected to a similar process to that of the lesser rod, only this time it is recharged by the direct action of the Logos himself, the Logos of the solar system. The exact location of this rod is known only to the Lord of the World and to the Johans of the race, and being the talisman of this evolution, the Johan of the second ray is, under the Lord of the World, its prime guardian, aided by the Deva Lord of the second plane. The Buddhas of activity are responsible for its custody, and under them the Johan of the ray. It is produced only at stated times when specific work has to be done. It is used not only at the initiating of man, but at certain planetary functions of which nothing is at present known. It has its place and function in certain ceremonies connected with the inner round and the triangle formed by Earth, Mars, and Mercury.
Well, this is a surprise to me to reread this, because the next big topic we're going to be getting into is this triangle. So that's an additional piece of information for that segment. What I'm wondering now is, if we go back to this passage, was there any mention of the flaming diamond? I don't think so. Nope, I don't see it. If there is, no. Because that would be a dead giveaway. It's the flaming diamond is only used from the third up, right? But he really keeps this generic. Anyway, it's just curious to see. Okay. All right, so we were looking at this. Were we? No, we weren't. We were looking at this, right? Yeah, there's a few things here. This is the only, where it says this rod is brought by the Lord of the World from Venus, is the only direct link between Sanat Kumara and being from the planet Venus that I know of. They talk a lot about him coming from the Venus chain and the Venus globe of that chain, and then traveling to the Venus globe of the Earth chain, and from there finally to our globe. But this is the only, correct me if I'm wrong, if you know of another reference, but this is the only reference that suggests I don't see how you can gainsay this, that the Lord of the world brought this rod from Venus. So that kind of, fills in that blank. It's not a big surprise, is it? But it's the only time I know that it's mentioned that. So he moved from Venus, carrying the rod to the Venus chain and the Venus globe of the Venus chain. That's the natural energetic entree, right, into our Earth scheme. Okay, I just wanted to point that out. There's great stuff in this. It's like, how many rabbit holes do you want to go down, Okay, next up, when the rods of initiation are held in the hands of the initiator in his position of power and at the stated season, wait a minute, I read this. Okay, the logos, we read that, sorry. Logos alluded to in the phrase, the flaming diamond, at certain of the final initiations, the 6th and 7th, transmits force via the logos from outside the system altogether, is almost certainly our solar logos, who steps down the electric fire from some great cosmic being, probably one of the super constellations, Pleiades, Sirius, or single stars in those two, as well as one of the stars of the Great Bear. Again, depending on which of the 7 great paths chosen by, at this point, Chohan, that will eventually lead him or her beyond the solar system altogether. So this even transcends ray type. We're now looking at the cosmic paths as the determining nature of the energy that's used at initiation at these 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th level initiations. Yes, Nisa.
Okay, so if if this rod is brought by Sanat Kumara from Venus, does that make the rod itself Venusian substance?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, isn't it? It's it's our alter ego. It's our sister planet. We will, and because they are a full round and race, a root race, no, not root race, a full chain and round ahead of us, which is an enormous amount of time and progress beyond where we are. Um, they have, because of that, are able to provide the beings for the office of solar angel, right? It could be that the rod is used because it's in keeping, it's in line with that solar angelic office, since these are Venusian humanity who have taken this office of solar angel, then it would make sense that the rod would have Venusian origin. Of course, we're not told. Yeah, it's a good question. I hadn't considered it, myself. Doesn't every um, doesn't every scheme have its own rod? Are we really borrowing the rod from Venus? It's just, there's not much said about this. This is the only statement I know that describes the origin of this rod called the Flaming Diamond. So, but I think you could get past the idea that it's a hand-me-down rod of initiation. Maybe, this type of thing happens throughout the solar system. You know, like for instance, Pluto is said, Mars is said to be the alter ego of Pluto. Perhaps the rod of initiation used on Pluto, what came from some great Martian logos who brought it from Mars, you know, and there may be other pairings, you know, they're indicated, these pairings. Um, you know, Neptune and Uranus are represent a certain final synthetic pair. But, you know, it brings up a really interesting line of inquiry. Unfortunately, there's not much information. Thank you, Nisa. Okay, we need a reader.
Magda, you want to read?
Yes. The rod of initiation, known as the flaming diamond, is used by Sanat Kumara, the one initiator. This rod lies hidden in the east and holds the fire hidden that irradiates the wisdom religion. This rod was brought by the Lord of the world from Venus.
Stop.
And one, yeah.
Stop. We read this. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So we talked about that. And then finally, we need to remember that this major rod is the one used on this planet, but within the 707. We also talked about that. Sorry. Yeah. So here's where I'd like you to read, if you would. Thank you, Magda.
Yes. First, the rod of initiation used for the first two initiations and wielded by the great Lord, the Christ, the world teacher. It is magnetized by application of the flaming diamond, the magnetization being repeated when each new world teacher takes office. There is a wonderful ceremony performed at the time that a new world teacher takes up his work. During the ceremony, he receives his rod of power, the same rod as used since the foundation of our planetary hierarchy, and holds it forth to the Lord of the world, who touches it with his own mighty rod, causing a fresh recharging of its electric capacity. This ceremony takes place at Shambhala. Second, the rod of initiation known as the flaming diamond and used by Sanat Kumara, the one initiator, called in the Bible the Ancient of Days. This rod lies hidden in the east and holds the fire, latent which irradiates the wisdom religion. This rod was brought by the Lord of the world when he took form and came to our planet 18 million years ago.
Thank you, Magda. I just had a thought that perhaps a planet is given, or a scheme, I should say, is given its own rod when it becomes a sacred planet, which we're very close to becoming. It's when our Earth Logos takes his next initiation, he will, and we will become a sacred planet. Perhaps it's at that time, because Venus certainly has been a sacred planet for a very, very long time. And so maybe you use another planet's rod of initiation until you yourself become a sacred planet, and then it's bestowed on you. Anyway, just a thought. Okay, first, rod of initiation used for the first two initiations and wielded by the great Lord, the Christ, the world teacher. It is magnetized by application of the flaming diamond, the magnetization being repeated when each new world teacher takes office. So the great rod, the flaming diamond, is also remagnetized at every world period by an even higher source, the solar logoic rod. The lesser rod is also called the hierarchical rod, where we're told in initiation, human and solar, it is used by a, quote, occult hierarchy for minor initiations, as well as for the first two monastic initiations by the Bodhisattva. So those are the ones we normally think of as the initiations where this rod is used, but we're told here that there are other minor initiations that we know nothing about where this rod is used. And where we might ask, or Nisa might ask anyway, where does this rod come from? You know? Yeah. Yes, Joe.
Sorry, it's off the wall from what you're talking about at the moment. But I'm playing a NASA role right now. It occurs to me that when great events occur, an initiation accompanies those great events. And I'm thinking of Jesus at Gethsemane and Christ on the cross. Do you think there's any relationship there at all?
Well, the events are the effects of the initiations and the recapitulations. You know, if a teacher had been arrested, you know, in a park outside of Jerusalem called Gethsemane, and there was no avatar involved, it wouldn't have been an event, you know, and thousands of people were crucified. So that also is not an event. What made it an event was that they marked great, well, in one case, a recapitulation, and in the other, an actual initiation for Jesus, it was his fourth, and for the Christ, mysteriously, it represented the sixth. So yeah, I think the initiation takes precedent, and that the events surrounding initiation become famous as a result of the fact that they had to do with that initiation. Another one, when, you know, Saul fell off his horse from that lightning bolt, which resulted in his third initiation, and he became Paul of Tarsus. That's, you know, again, the event became famous as a result of the initiation. Joe, you had something else?
Yes, it follows then that the energies that we're speaking about could be applicable as well at some level within the individual not aspirant, I don't think, but the disciple.
Say that again.
It feels like it grounds to me all of a sudden that having had an event, Christ then had an initiation, Christ then had I'm doing this back, an event occurred. And that this would be similar for us right here as we're disciples, that we could have some kind of a initiation followed by an event.
Yeah, I think that's sound. What you know, that idea of connecting the event to the, you could say an increase. You know, there's minor initiations, a definite increase in one's energy field. You know, I'm sure that we could share white light experiences, you know, for the next 10 hours. And that there's a kind of event, in some cases, strictly inner event, but sometimes marked also by outer happenings. You know, they might, it's nothing like the events connected with the great initiations that we have been written about at all. But I think there's something to that. It does have an impact on the physical plane, and those could be called events. Thank you, Joe. That was interesting. Okay, next, there is a wonderful ceremony performed at the time that the New World teacher takes up his work. During the ceremony, he receives his rod of power, the same rod as used since the foundation of our planetary hierarchy, and holds it forth to the Lord of the world, who touches it with his own mighty rod, causing a fresh recharging of its electric capacity. This ceremony takes place at Shambhala. Well, if you needed motivation, to get on the ball and get through your initiations, being at that ceremony would be a great motivation, wouldn't it? Can you imagine seeing this happen? The new world teacher, the next one will be Kuthumi, presented with the rod that the Christ, I'm sure it's the Christ, it's the outgoing one who presents it, and then holding that rod up and having it touched by the flaming diamond. What a ceremony. That's extraordinary. At any rate, Sanatkumar receives the new Bodhisattva, who at the end of the Aquarian age will be the Master Kuthumi. But the rod itself has never changed, at least not since the establishing of this globe's hierarchy 18 million years ago. How many bodhisattvas have there been since the rod came forth 18 million years ago? Since it has been that long since the establishing of the hierarchy on this globe, representing approximately, I did the math, 7,200 astrological ages, we could assume that there have been many thousands of bodhisattvas. It's really a staggering thought. Did you have your hand up, Maria Christina? No. Okay. All right. Next, let's take a look at the footnote referenced by the statement, this ceremony takes place at Shambhala. Can we get a reader, please, for these two footnotes?
Marguerite. You want to read?
Sure. Shambhala, the sacred island in the Gobi Desert, the center in Central Asia, where the Lord of the world, the Ancient of Days, has its headquarters. HPB says it is a very mysterious locality on account of its future associations. The world teacher takes office cyclically. His cycles do not coincide with those of the Manu, as the Manu holds office for the entire root race. The world teacher gives out the keynote for the various religions and is the emanating source for periodical religious impulses. The duration of his cycles are not given out. The Buddha held office prior to the present world teacher, and upon his illumination, his place was taken by the Lord Maitreya, whom the Occidentals called the Christ.
Thank you, Marguerite. Okay, first, Shambhala, the sacred island in the Gobi Desert, the center in Central Asia, where the Lord of the world, the Ancient of Days, has his headquarters. HPB says it is a very mysterious locality on account of its future associations. And then she gives these page numbers. I could not find I couldn't find the quote on this page or anywhere. So I don't know where this came from. Yeah, but there are a number of references in this secret doctrine on Shambhala and the sacred island in the Gobi Desert. For example, quote, the island, according to belief, exists in the present hour now as an oasis surrounded by the dreadful wildernesses of the great desert, the Gobi, whose sands no foot hath crossed in the memory of man. Okay, so the 500,000 square mile Gobi Desert, you can see how huge it is. It extends across southern Mongolia and all of northern China. So, it's no surprise that in HPB's time, no one would ever have crossed it. Also, just to go back to her quote, it says it's in an oasis in the Gobi Desert. Well, you have to realize that of course, that Shambhala does not exist on the physical plane. However, it does exist on physical etheric levels, probably made of first subplane etheric substance, atomic substance. Sanat Kumar himself is in quote unquote physical, meaning physical etheric incarnation. And he himself has taken almost certainly an atomic level substance form. And so that would just follow that the Shambhala anchors this highest, in typical first ray, seventh ray fashion, anchors the highest in the lowest by means of the first subplane of the etheric. But the best descriptions of Shambhala are actually found in the Blue Books, where over 1,000 instances of the word are found. For example, will governs the way into Shambhala and is the foundation for all approach to, appreciation of, and identification with being. And the initiate has heard the voice from Shambhala just as he earlier heard the voice of the silence and the voice of his master. Occult obedience gives place to enlightened will. He can now be trusted to walk and work alone because he is unalterably one with his group, with the hierarchy, and finally with Shambhala. So just two examples out of literally 1,000 in the Blue Books. Finally, one of the most occult references to Shambhala comes from Rule 7 in Rays and Initiations. This is one of my favorite quotes in all the Blue Books. For disciples and initiates, let the group life emit the word of invocation and thus evoke response within those distant ashrams where move the Chohans of the race of men. They are no longer men, as are the masters, but having passed beyond that lesser stage, have linked themselves with the great council in the highest secret place. Let the group sound a dual chord, reverberating in the halls where move the masters, but finding pause and prolongation within those radiant halls where move the lights which carry out the will of God. Yeah, I don't think the word Shambhala is even in this group. It's the highest secret place. Okay, next up. Second footnote, the world teacher takes office cyclically. His cycles do not coincide with those of the Manu, as the Manu holds office for the entire root race. The world teacher gives out the keynote for the various religions and is the emanating source for periodical religious impulses. Okay, so there is a new Manu for every root race. Thus, there have been 5 Manus since the establishing of the hierarchy in Lemurian times, compared to many thousands of world teachers. Let's take a closer look. Can we get a reader, please?
Maria Cristina. You want to read? Okay. Miri. You want to read? Am I? Yeah. Okay, so Miri. Nisa. Or Nisa. You want to read?
Oh, sure.
Can you hear? Oh, sorry.
The Bodhisattva or world teacher works with the evolving life within the form, with the implanting of religious ideas and with the development of philosophical concepts, both in individuals and races. The mystic works as a general rule under the department of the world teacher or the Christ, and the occultist more frequently under that of the Manu or ruler. But when both types have passed through the four minor rays in the department of the Lord of Civilization, then a completion of their development may be seen, and the mystic becomes the occultist, and the occultist includes the characteristics of the mystics.
Thank you, Nisa. Well, that's going to do it for today.